Hey guys, welcome. My name is Darshan Doshi. At Dasar, we aim to bring together a group of people who want to work towards their goal. They are curious but have not taken the necessary action to achieve their goals. Dasar is the go to place to get actionable insights and learnings from successful people. People like you and me, but who have gone on to achieve their goals. I have some incredible guests on my show today. We have Ashwini Deshpande and Ashish Deshpande, who are a husband wife duo and co founders of Elephant Design. They are also the founding members of ADI, amongst many other initiatives. So, welcome Ashwini and Ashish to Dasar.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Darshan.
Thanks, Darshan.
Ashwini and Ashish, when someone approaches you and asks for who is Ashwini or who is Ashish, what do you say?
In this whole world of Twitter introductions where people write really interesting stuff like trout fisher and, you know, turtle saver and all that, I don't get that honestly. So for me, introduction is pretty simple. I'm Ashwini. I am a communications designer. I do branding, and I'm the co-founder of Elephant. And that's that. I don't do trout fishing.
Great, thanks. How about you, Ashish?
When I became an industrial designer and I started on this professional journey, and those days I used to travel in buses, trains, and people would ask, "क्या करते हो?" and and I would say industrial designer हूँ, and they would say, "क्या? Industry बनाते हो?" I said, नहीं, industrial designer हूँ. So it was a very, it was an embarrassing moment for me at that point of time. So much so that a few years I stopped telling people that I'm an industrial designer. I would say architect हूँ, engineer हूँ, anything, artist हूँ, doesn't matter. But if you mention the word to general public about industrial design, it starts off a chain of questions which you are not very comfortable with. So, but that was then. Then that's, I think, kind of gave me that little insight that industrial design is not understood, and it's important to make people understand industrial design. So I stick to the honesty. I'm an industrial designer by heart, by soul, by profession, by practice. I'm nothing but an industrial designer, and of course a co-founder at Elephant Design. And what Elephant Design does is it helps transform businesses. That's what I do.
Great. That reminded me of a story. When my family, I try to explain them what I do, which is working with early stage startups and founders and help them, really try to build a product or a business that is sustainable and is growing. It's still a tough time for me to explain what I really do, right? And it kind of
Sure.
concludes with, I'm a consultant. So, Ashwini, my first question to you, in the last couple of decades, 3 decades, you've designed, branded a lot of digital and physical products, right? And that's not just in India but around the world. And some very big names, proud brands, as I would like to call them. So when you think about design, how does your approach change when you are branding or designing a digital product versus a physical product? Maybe some thoughts, some checklists, or some processes that you follow?
Okay, that's an interesting question because it kind of spans across the 3 decades. I suddenly realized that I did create brands over that much time. But what is a brand really? So brand is the sum total of what the brand says, what is perceived, what is the smell, sound, vision, tactile, oral, all of that. And they also say that brand is what people speak about you when you are not in the room. So when you are actually branding a product, physical product or a digital one or a service or an experience, what really matters is what is the story, and is that story relevant to the intended audience. And I think that is the biggest crux of branding. So you have to begin with what is the authentic story, and then of course you have to give a physical manifestation to it and make it reach across various media. uh, Also, the big difference now, as you asked about digital and physical products. So, earlier on, if we were working on an FMCG brand, we would always first think about how would it come across on the shelf, on a label. Or if it's a corporate branding exercise, we would say how would the visiting card look, which now, this decade, last decade was the last one probably for visiting cards, and they are dead now. But that was how it used to be. But today, if you are doing a brand for anything, whether it's a physical product or digital one, it is going to reach its audience first through mobile screen, no matter what you're making. So we would always see how the app icon is going to look, because visiting cards are dead. And packaging is going to happen much later. You will see it in your phone first. So I think digital first. How does the app icon look? What are the pixels? Is it economic in terms of the bandwidth and pixels? So all the considerations have really changed now. But yet, story is really what matters when you build a brand.
So Ashish, my next question is for you. India roughly has 70 to 80,000 startups today. Out of those, roughly 10 to 12,000 startups are focused on deep tech, the new technologies that are coming through. So within those, we see a lot more, healthcare devices, IoTs, AI, machine learning, blockchain, all of these technology-based startups which are used in traditional industry, could be even the old industries such as the financial industry or applied to healthcare, applied to retail. So I'm sure you kind of worked with few brands which are operating in some of these industries and maybe even healthcare devices or IoT or wearables. Maybe you can share some thoughts and insights on how do you go about designing or branding such an upcoming technology within either India or around the world.
I think the landscape is changing. What's happening, as you rightly mentioned, technology is slowly coming into our lives, be it whatever. I mean, today you use tech for cooking, or you use it for high-end applications like medicine or education. So let me give an example of two companies. One is a company and a brand by the name Plesmo. Now, what Plesmo did, and probably you could check this up as a case study on our website, but what Plesmo interestingly did is to get high technology in terms of IoT of things and this whole concept of coding to children. So how do you teach children IoT of things? Or how do you teach children to code? Now the answer was very simple, that you just tell them how to code. You just take them through a series of steps. But this company stepped one level back and said that we cannot teach children in this manner, because if you go by this philosophy, there is a whole bunch of children who are not into coding. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of children probably who don't want to do anything with electronics, right? So how do you get them to first of all learn? The other example is of a company by the name Symphony, which is into healthcare products, which can help patients who have probably suffered something as serious as a stroke recover. Now that's the first example was for children. The second example is probably for senior people, probably people of my age or older. Sometimes it's younger, but mostly it's people from that age group who undergo this whole life transforming condition of undergoing a stroke and losing a serious set of functions from your body. Now they have nothing to do with technology, but the technology has to play on them, right? So what is the least common denominator for all these? Is the fact that you have to focus on the people who are going to use that technology. I think your question now talks about how do you want to deal with it? How do you deal with it as a process, right?
Right.
So the process begins with questioning one, the technology itself. Yeah. The second process begins with understanding the end users, because the end user is very important. So in both the cases, and interestingly, in both the cases, in the first case, in the case of Plesmo, when the founders they came to us to talk about what they had in mind, and they literally had it in their mind. And then they spoke in terms of what they want to do and achieve. And I gave a very patient hearing to all that, and at the end of the day I said, go and make a proof of concept. And they said, yes, we will do that. And I said, the reason is not because you want to prove that the technology works. The reason is that we can go back to children and see if it works with them. And the good part was that they were very sincere about it. They stuck to that part. Then they came back. They came back with the belief that, you know, what I was telling them in terms of this concept of design thinking, to go back to the core audience, which was the children, is going to work. They came with the proof of concept. We went back to the children. We tested out with a series of children across board. And the learnings we had were mind-boggling. Okay, and that actually went on to create the process by which the products got designed. Even in the case of the second product which I talked about, which was the wearable device which helps stroke patients recover, when we went back to the patients, we figured out that the patients had already undergone a trauma, which means you are just not a person like you and me, but I probably I am in a depressed state of mind. I am already, some functions of my body is not working, and then you are asking me to wear some electronics. That is just not getting, I mean, that's just not been done. And the fact that many of them probably were looking for much simpler solutions, probably were looking for empathy in terms of that little comfort and low to be low on stress on their minds as well as their body, was the way to actually go about it. And this only came through when the process of going back and testing with the right set of audience actually was followed.
Now, just on a couple of things that you mentioned, right? Plesmo, you're kind of saying they don't want to code, but they want to still build, right? And so just on that note, what we also got is Dasar tools. Okay, these are technology tools which you'll find on our website, www.dasar.in, and they will have a bunch of no code, low code tools which can just help you get started with prototyping, iterative methodology, bit of design as well. So there are a lot of good new design tools that have come up which are as simple as plug and play, and which will help you create designs which, you know, won't make you look amateur but not necessarily a professional, but it's good enough to kind of put it out there, test it, validate it, get feedback from the customers and come back. Ashwini or Ashish, any of you, right? I have seen a few products which have gone through design overhaul after they've got X amount of funding, Y amount of customers, and then they have to do the whole revamp.
Yeah.
Right? So any thoughts on or examples where how difficult or what are the challenges when you have to go back to the drawing board and when you've not started at the start, right? For example, maybe some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think very well put that, you know, you have to get the design involved much earlier on in the process. As soon as you get an idea, we say just call us so that we'll help you build the idea or develop the idea. Otherwise, what happens is it becomes like a cosmetic overhaul if you bring design in at a much later stage. And honestly, design can add so much more value, and to just be able to do that cosmetic or the skin of whatever it is like underutilizing what design can do. And there are some examples, and sometimes startups are in such a hurry because of various reasons to launch that they'll end up launching their first proof of concept almost, and then we've had to sort of look at those and see what is working, what is not working. What works interestingly with startups is that they are a little more adventurous, they are a little more risk taking, so they don't mind completely pivoting and doing something new. That is not how the large businesses work. So even when they launch something and it has not worked and they know they need to overhaul, they are a little hesitant in changing everything. So it's like almost doing two different worlds. You know, one world which is willing to take the risk, willing to go that full length, and another world which actually has all the resources is not really willing to do that.
So when it comes to such consumer durable brands or even products, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences? Maybe some examples that you look up to.
The company was Braun, and Braun is a German company which came up probably in the 60s and 70s, and today continues to be there as part of the larger Gillette and the P&G group of companies. But they were independent then, and they started creating a philosophy of products where they very quickly understood that technology needs to be there, but technology doesn't have to be up there, yeah, in your face. And what people need is something simple to wear, but what goes behind it doesn't need to be, to be speaking to you all the time. So they created a philosophy, and this was thanks to a great designer, Dieter Rams, who laid down this philosophy and principles of doing very simplified design, yeah, where the technology, the manufacturing processes, any other business concerns, they're all underlying, but what you come across is a very simple set of products. And the Brown products kind of exemplified this philosophy. And if you ever have seen any Brown products, they're extremely simple to use. They have simple interfaces. They don't really jump up in your face. They are not flashy. They don't have that little chrome thing hanging around which you wonder why it is there. They don't have flashing LED lights which we see in many of the electronic products. We kind of interface today. I can see one right up there. Okay, lighting up, the bottom of the laptop. So this whole concept of being honest in what you do in terms of producing the product and giving what people needed is what simply is a design function. Well, let me give an example of another company and see how it works, because again in the Indian context where the story becomes very strong. So there's a company by the name Symphony Limited, and they were traditionally manufacturing air coolers. In fact, when they began manufacturing air coolers was a very unorganized market, with these metal canisters and so on. And now, of course, my own relationship with a company like Symphony is about 30 years, where I've provided consulting with them. And in the initial years, of course, we were again designing coolers which probably could work. But the interesting part was this. Again, I'm repeating this, that we need to go back and look what's happening to your products in people's homes. And we did that one day because our products were being sold, at the market at probably discounted rates. And the reason being, there's too much of competition. So when we went back, interestingly, what we discovered was that our own products were being shunted out of people's homes. So we looked at where's the air cooler, and they would say, वो तो balcony में पड़ा है. अच्छा, balcony में क्यों पड़ा? नहीं, जगह लेता है ना. अच्छा, so what's there? It's doing in the balcony. It's being used to dry clothes or whatever else, put things on top of each other and kind of use it as a stand or something like that. And we said, and then we looked at other people's homes, and everybody was doing this. They were just pushing out the cooler. And that reminded us, that gave us that little insight about and that little story about India. And the story was probably, it's best told in this this poem by Javed Akhtar. There's a book called Tarkash. I don't know if you read this. It's a lovely book. And in that he says that हर घर में एक कमरा कम है. Yeah, so every house has one less room, regardless of how big your house is. I love your house, Darshan, but probably you still need one more room, right? We all need that. We need that one more room. We just need that little extra square foot, right? We need that extra window, despite the fact that you already have probably 10 windows in your house. So we figured out that why not reduce the footprint, and that kind of gave us that insight that if we create a cooler in a 1 square feet by 1 square feet, which is one tiny tile, probably it will it will catch the imagination of people, and it will work beautifully because people appreciated the fact that you are saving them that square foot. It was a latent need at the back of the mind, and this story kind of played through the product. And you didn't have to tell people the story. The people looked at the product and they understood. And they understood it across the world. This product gets sold today in some 60 odd countries. It's been copied by everybody. Okay, it's a format now which is a standard format of creating a cooler, even in the Indian market or the Chinese market or the Middle Eastern market or whatever. So that's the power. If you have the right insight and the right story, it kind of leads you to. Right? So that's the importance of stories, and whether it is the philosophy of design, of simplicity, honesty, or just the story which connects with you, which connects to that latent need inside you, that desire inside you, and that's good enough for any brand to be successful.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that example. Ashwini, what's the most peculiar or unique brand that you've ever created?
Okay, this is like absolutely a favorite question. Thank you. So Do you know that there is a thing called a limbic imprint on our brains, and that's something we are born coded, right? And therefore, there are certain things that evoke very positive emotions when we come across those, especially certain smells or tastes. So there are certain foods that you may not have ever had, but when you have it, you just feel very positive and good about it. And that's actually something, like I said, we are born coded. And that actually was a brief of one of the brands that we built. So around 7 or 8 years ago, a startup founder approached us and said that I want to build a brand that actually evokes those limbic imprint memories. And what a unique brief, can you imagine? So the idea was that they were going to make ethnic drinks, the drinks that we grew up having made by our grandmothers and mothers, and the shikanji and kokam and sattu and panakam, and India is full of these very indigenous ethnic recipes that are made from local ingredients, are consumed in the right time of the year, right season, so that they are good for us, are very tasty, and are made with a lot of love. So they have actually coded us over a number of centuries. And if somebody was actually going to evoke that, that was a unique challenge, because how do you build that brand which doesn't start from the shelf or competition or what's going on, what's the trend? Nothing. It starts from something that we cannot even see or feel, but it's there. So we approached this whole process very, very differently. And we said that it's a blue ocean thinking. It's not about comparing yourself with what's out there, but it's creating something that has never existed, but should exist. So this sort of brought us to a debate or a discussion on what did we love doing, or when was life very simple and happy for all of us. Because now all of us are in this whole transactional world. Relationships are transactional. There is nothing spoken or done or given without some ulterior motive. But life wasn't always like this. So when was it simple and good and happy? And we said when we were children. When we were children, we could just do and say as it was, and it didn't matter. It didn't ruin the relationships. It made us happy. We slept peacefully at the end of the day. So we said, so what did we love doing as children? Let's try and go back to that. And I listen to ghazals among all other music. And one of my very favorite ghazals is वो कागज़ की कश्ती वो बारिश का पानी वो नानी की बातें. So grandmothers used to tell us stories when we grew up, and that was actually the birth of this brand's name, Paper Boat. And interestingly, no matter what culture you come from, whether in India or probably somewhere else, as children you would have launched a little paper boat in the puddle next to your house, and it would evoke that limbic memory. So that's how we build that brand, and everything about that brand is differentiated, is good, is simple, and the core of it is authentic and alive. And I don't think you get to work on briefs like these that often. So I think that's a really unique brand that we got to build.
That is such an amazing story, and Paper Boat, really the first time when I sipped the mango juice, I went back to my native town, which is a very small town called Dudhni on the Maharashtra-Karnataka border. And I remember sitting with grandfather at 9 in the morning and, just having, squeezing the mango and then drinking the juice. And that Paper Boat kind of evokes that feeling, right? And the brand, lovely to know the kind of clarity that the person who kind of engages an expert and allows the expert to do the job. There are so many good designers out there, or just let me say there are a lot of designers out there.
Many good also.
Right. So what are the top 2 or 3 things where you see most designers go wrong?
Okay. I think 2 or 3 things. Firstly, they lose sight of the user many a times, because designers are by nature very exploratory people, right? So they sometimes get carried away by their ideas. They fall in love with their ideas so much that they keep exploring further and maybe lose sight of the user. So while a design might look phenomenal or seem amazing to the designer or design team themselves, it probably doesn't add as much value to the user it could have. So there are many opportunities that just fall short, are not reached completely. So I would say that is the first issue that I see with several designers, that they lose sight of the user. The other is this whole quest of getting likes on whatever your social media is so strong that you land up creating differentiation for the sake of creating differentiation. And does it really add value to the intended user as much as it should? Because design is not your self-expression, it's not art. There is a very big difference between art and design, right? Design is meant to serve a certain purpose, a certain brief. And again, losing sight of that because you want to create something awesome, amazing, 1,000 likes on Instagram. So again, losing sight of the brief or the opportunity.
What makes you kind of, get up out of the bed and do the things so passionately about design, about companies, and, overcoming the challenges that we talked about? Some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think let me go back a few years. And well, you said you wanted to understand about us individually and so on. We have literally grown up together. So we went to design school when I was 16 and he had just barely completed 17. And we have been together since. So we have literally grown up together, and just like any naive young couples believe, we used to believe that we'll retire at 40. Okay. So when we started out, I think we were 23 when we started Elephant. And 40 seemed like a long time. I mean, 17 years you worked, and by then you should be able to retire. So for a long time, we used to believe that we will retire at 40. And I don't know Bahamas, but well, whatever. And interestingly, when we did turn 40, we were so busy that it didn't even occur to us that, we had once said that we'll retire at 40. We were busy doing so many things, growing the company, learning things, shifting gears. I think we were just, super excited about what we were doing. So the time just came and went. And then when we were approaching 50, again, a couple of years before that, the thought did occur that, and there are a lot of people around us who said, oh, you said you would retire at 40, like my sister said. And look what happened, you're working day and night. So we again started talking about we'll retire at 50. And that time we were a little more serious, little older, of course. So we started thinking, and we spent probably a whole year discussing what will we do after we retire. And very serious discussions because we really wanted to retire. And then we realized that there is nothing else that is more exciting than what we were doing at that time. So we didn't actually have an alternate choice which seemed more interesting, exciting, better, rosier, in any way, any possible way, from any angle. So then we said, well, that's a bonus, right? I mean, in our mind, we could be retired, but let's continue doing what's so exciting.
How have you managed to work effectively? What were some of the base foundation rules which you consciously or unconsciously followed?
Very, very stringent about that rule. It sounds quite silly, but it actually worked for us. That there is a physical place from which beyond that we don't talk about home. We forget that we are husband and wife. We are colleagues, and there is just one big picture in the mind, which is to do the best what Elephant can do. And I think as long as that vision was common and the goal was common, there was never an argument about that. And if I'm doing something which he doesn't agree with, or the other way around, but as long as it is for the greater good of Elephant, it sort of didn't matter over the years. And I think there's also a lot of credit to the fact that so we literally used to say that once we lock the house, I mean, now of course we have elders in the house, but once we lock the house, we lock the husband-wife relationship. That's that. And a lot of couples would benefit if they really did that.
Why live in Pune? What's your individual perspective on it?
So interestingly, neither of us were born or brought up in Pune. I grew up in Aurangabad. I was born in Aurangabad. My parents lived there for a long time, and when I was doing my graduation project, I got an opportunity to work with a company in Pune. And I worked with them for 6 months doing various corporate communication, collaterals, exhibitions, annual reports and so on. A very industrial company, German company. And towards the end of what I was doing, there was an exhibition I had designed for them which took place in Mumbai, and their corporate communications head, global head, happened to be in India at that time. And he said, "Oh, you're putting up an exhibition, let's go and see it." So he happened to come to Nehru Center in Mumbai to see the exhibition, and he liked what he saw, and he said, "Who's designed it?" And I was hanging around, and I was introduced to him. And I was so young and so naive that I didn't even realize that I was meeting somebody really super important. And he said, "This is fantastic, I like what you've done. Would you like to do a project for us, a global project for us?" So I said, "Sure, what is the project?" So he said, "I want somebody to do our global brochure and a global film. And we have 13 locations across, and I want to cover all of those. Would you do it?" And you won't believe, this was November, and I was going to graduate in April. And I said, "I can do it, but I can do it only after April." So, and I'm going to form a company. By then, we had decided that we're going to start Elephant. So, I won't do it personally, but my company can take it up. And now I'm thinking, why did he even listen to me? Because that was quite rude to not say that, "Yeah, let's do it, let's start now." I mean, I said, if you're willing to wait, I can do it. So he said, "Sure." Because in those days, people used to take time to make a brief, and people used to like travel back and forth, meet each other, send telex or fax, and it was that world in 89. Well, this was 88 November. So he said, "Fine, no problem, you come over in April and we'll brief you." And then what he did is he assigned a person in Pune to coordinate this. So she said, she was here, and she said, "You guys should work from here because I'm going to be coordinating this project, and it's big." And it was very big for her career as well. So we said, "Okay, let's do that." And interestingly, he also offered a very interesting fee. So while in another conversation, he said, "I have one issue. I don't have a large budget." So I said, "Fine." I had no clue what the budget should be in any case. We had never done a professional assignment till then. So he said, "I just have 100,000 Deutschmarks." And I again had no clue what was the conversion. None of us had. There was no Google that time, so you couldn't quickly check. But in those days, it wasn't a euro, it was Deutschmarks, and I think that was about 13 lakh rupees at that time. And which is what I discovered much later. I said, "Yeah, fine, we'll do it." So that's how we came to Pune, and we said, "We will come here, we'll do this project, and then we'll move on to a cool city like Bangalore or Delhi or something." And we just didn't. The city just held us, and we are rooted here now. So we feel we are Puneris and we are here.
Excellent. So thanks a lot for this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. That was Ashwini Deshpande and Ashish Deshpande from Elephant Design, Puneris as they call themselves as well. My name is Darshan Doshi, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you've actually liked it and got even a single insight, hit the like button, share it with your friends who could benefit from here, and subscribe. Visit www.dasar.in. You'll find a bunch of my writings over there. You'll find writings of some of the best writers around the world. You'll find a lot of videos, and more importantly, a community where people are trying to do things that they want to build a business, they want to get fit, or they just want to achieve their goals. So if this is something that's important to you, join Dasar, and we will see you next time. Thank you.